Okay, I think maybe we'll just get started. I'll start with an acknowledgement. And I want to pay my respects to everybody's. Sorry, Josh is just coming in. I want to pay my respects to everybody's land that they're dialing in from today. I will introduce myself first. My name is Jacinta Wright. I'm a Namba woman and I'm the policy officer at the National Justice Project for this campaign. And I am honoured to be joined by Eva and Josh, who will be coming in soon. So I will give a bit of a rundown on Eva. So Eva is a policy and advocacy lead at the Smart Justice for Young People and a project officer at the Centre for Innovation of Justice. Eva is working on research looking at the needs and experiences of young people who interact with the criminal system and other service system types. Eva has spent the last few years working in the Community Legal Centre and across the different areas of legal advocacy, policy, and volunteer coordination. Josh, who will be joining us soon, is a proud Narangara and Nurundjeri man living in and working in Alice Springs in the Northern Territory. A driven advocate for youth justice, Josh's journey began through storytelling, allowing him to express his hopes for young people and frustrations with the system. His trajectory into youth advocacy has been fueled by his lived experience as a young man being caught in the system until 18 and living and working in remote central desert. Previously, Josh has worked as a cultural mentor in Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre, which he worked at Owen Springs Educational Centre before it was unfortunately closed down. He now works as a community engagement lead for Headspace and serves as the co-chair of Central Australian Youth Justice and the co-chair of Youth Services Alice Springs Committee. So while we're still waiting on Josh to jump in, I will just a few admin things. We recommend for viewing to set your Zoom view settings to speaker mode, so you'll only be able to see Eva and Josh. We'll also have the chat. Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's totally fine. I just I introduced you. I don't know if you heard that or not, but yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. Thank you.
That's okay. Yeah. And yeah, please, as we continue on, put questions in the chat and we'll have the last 15 minutes to go through and answer as many as possible. And just to note that today, with sensitive topics that are being brought up, so if you need any support, we've included links in the chat below. So I'll kick us off. Around Australia, we are seeing this tough on youth crime rhetoric, but evidence shows that criminalising youth is not only counterproductive, it's really harmful. What are you guys in your jobs and your daily life seeing from young people and their interactions with police and how that's shaping their sense of belonging and justice and safety? Let's start with Josh.
Yeah, so I'd just like to start with acknowledging that I'm on Pitjantjatjara country of the Anangu people out at Uluru at the moment, and I pay my respects and thank the Anangu people for having me here as a visitor. So basically, I live in Alice Springs, right? And I'd like to echo what Samara said in her breakout about the amount of racism that we live in our country, and how magnified that is on an extreme scale in the Northern Territory and especially in Alice Springs. It's all very close to home. It's right there in your face. It's happening every single day, every moment of the day. And we can just go off what we've seen happen in the Territory recently with that young man losing his life at the hands of police. That's the most extreme case of what can happen, is a young person loses their life, you know. And these kids these kids here are experiencing that every single day. They're living that. You know, that's a cousin, a brother, a nephew, a friend that this is happening to. So, I mean, if this can happen to one person in that situation, it can happen to any one of these children. And these kids know that. I don't really know what else I can say.
Yeah, no, thank you, Josh. That was really we see it all over the news, and I'm pretty sure on the ground it's really upsetting, really sad to see so much racism. It's appalling. Eva, you're doing research in regards to police contact with children and the youth. What are you seeing of their experiences in day-to-day interactions with police?
Thanks, Jacinta, and thanks for what you said, Josh. I'd also just like to acknowledge that I'm joining from stolen Boonwurrung land today and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining the call today. I think what Josh said is absolutely true. I think that's something that's really important to highlight. You know, I can only really speak to the so-called Victorian context, but at the moment, media scrutiny around youth crime and young people and the kind of damaging, really dehumanising narratives that are being told is pretty out of control. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that young people are hearing and internalising these really dehumanising, deficit-based narratives about themselves and about their communities. And the harm and sort of trauma that that's causing in and of itself is so significant. I think, in terms of what we're seeing day to day here in Victoria, it's really that young people from overrepresented and overcriminalised communities, including Aboriginal children and young people, and multicultural children and young people, particularly African and Māori and Pacifica young people in Victoria, and children in residential care, among other groups of children and young people, are really given no grace and no agency and very limited support, not only by police themselves, but also kind of importantly by the systems that rely on or work alongside police, including the education system, the family violence system, and the community service system. And so this sort of manifests not only in extremely harmful police practices, including racial profiling, punitive responses to young people experiencing mental health crises, and the misidentification of young people as respondents in family violence intervention orders. I think they're called different things in different states. But also and I feel like Samara touched on this and a couple of other people have touched on this today too, but really, really terrible responses to young people as victims of crime, and particularly as victim survivors of adult perpetrated family violence.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, I unfortunately didn't get to see Samara speak, but that's really insightful. And like you've both kind of touched on it, they've either when children are the victims of crime or they're misidentified as being the perpetrators, there seems to always be this punitive response no matter what happens. And so I think that in itself really highlights the need, like the harmfulness of punitive responses really highlight the need for therapeutic models and care and support. And I know, Josh, through your work in mental health and what you did at the Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre, what, from your experiences with that and bring that together, what are some key things that really need to change in this punitive response that we're seeing, and like what needs to be embedded to make sure either youth have a voice and things like that, giving youth a voice? What are some other things that we really need to highlight to make sure that we're keeping youth safe and we're starting to really turn our heads to it?
Yeah, so I guess in the Territory here, we're living through a pretty harsh time for young people. We've had a change of government last year, and now a lot of laws and bills changed that have affected young people on an extent that has never happened before. So I guess my first thoughts are to start uh, going against the government and talking to the government and people in power about pulling some of those things back. We have the evidence to show that what they're trying to imply to young people doesn't work and does make it like a lot worse, and it makes the crime a lot worse, and whatnot. I guess some of the things I've seen that need to change is, I've always said, bored, traumatized kids aren't criminals. So, let's create jobs for the people that know how to work with these young people, that know how to work with traumatized people, some of the most traumatized people on our planet. Let's create those jobs. Let's put that money into training and creating opportunities for people that know how to work with young traumatized people. The best, better than anyone. We're talking about young people whose brains haven't even finished developing yet, who are living with this trauma and this racism that's 24-hour in their face racism. The trauma that they carry from them ancestors and, the stolen generation and the intervention, they carry it with them wherever they go. Every Aboriginal person carries that. So you're talking about people whose brains haven't even developed yet, and people that are some of the most traumatized people on our planet. And you've got, police responding, you're incarcerating these young people and expecting them to recognize something they don't even understand because of all of these things that I've mentioned. So why not get the people that know how to work with them best, who are going to get the best results from these young people, who are going to help these young people understand more about their life or more about the world and who they are and what they can offer to the world,
Yeah.
And those people that know how to work with those young traumatized people are Aboriginal people,
Yeah.
mentors and role models, people that have lived that and know that can guide, be role models, kind of thing.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Josh. That definitely, I agree that it's almost that peer relationship with, although it's not youth and youth, but having that cultural bond and to really bring that in and tie that together to help mentor and help, deal with things best way. Eva, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think Josh put that so beautifully. Honestly, I don't have anything to add to that. It's like there are ample opportunities to be doing so much better by children and young people, and we're just not taking them.
Yeah, I think it's really obvious. I mean, it's a more broad systemic thing, but both in the Northern Territory and Victoria, we've seen kind of a shift to privatisation towards security guards. And, they are typically in areas that kids like to hang around, like shopping malls and things like that. And so to you guys, how do we ensure, like it kind of already is, but how do we ensure that they don't become just police in a different uniform? Ava?
Yeah, sure. I really love this question. I think it's really important. We've been seeing so much of this in Victoria recently, particularly around the exclusion of overrepresented young people from libraries and shopping centres and other public spaces by private security or even sometimes by service system workers. So something that we speak a lot about as a team within Smart Justice for Young People is kind of thinking about how the harmful ideologies that underpin the way police also exist outside of the police force. For example, in the really high rates of children and young people being suspended and expelled, and soft suspensions, soft expulsions as well, are really high at the moment. Our kind of evidence and practice experience seems to show. And also the eviction of young people from public spaces. So essentially any kind of practice that seeks to control young people's behaviour through surveillance and punishment and exclusion is kind of an extension of policing in a way. So something that we're trying to do at the moment as part of our kind of the broader conversations we're having about decentering police from community safety is trying to have conversations with stakeholders working in the education space and the mental health space particularly, around sort of developing a shared sense of accountability in ending the policies and practices that really entrench the criminalisation of these children and young people, rather than seeing criminalisation as only the sort of business of police, courts and prisons, if that makes sense. So I think what we're seeing in Victoria is that, yes, policing is a massive problem, and it's not to discount that at all, but we're seeing those same ideologies and that same surveillance and that same exclusion of young people from spaces that they belong, and same, all of that same stuff is happening in other systems as well. So it's not only about the ways in which these young people are being actively criminalised, but it's also the ways in which their needs aren't being met by the service system, basically. So, having less access to really meaningful mental health support, less access to support as victim survivors of family violence and that kind of thing as well. So, yeah, I think it's a sort of broader conversation. It's a really, really excellent question.
Definitely. Josh, do you have anything to add in the context of the NT that you're seeing around this?
Yeah, I guess it's pretty counterintuitive, right? That form of surveillance. It creates a fear and like a hypervigilance with young people. Same practice, just different uniform, I guess with young people, they're so hypervigilant about this type of surveillance and the people watching them and everything they do and criticizing everything that they do, that it's it keeps you in this constant form of fight or flight when you're in the public or in the public eye. And then you'll get approached by someone and it's quite easily escalated due to all the things I've already mentioned, and the hypervigilance and the trauma. And then you have like the underlying issues of the mental health and grief and trauma that people are carrying. And it's considered non-compliance when someone's having an episode, and completely ignored all these underlying issues and key drivers of why someone is acting the way they are acting.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Josh. And both of what you were saying kind of goes to the school exclusion report and how the hypervigilance is continued in schools, with police now coming into schools and engaging with kids and in one space where they should really be safe, and it should be about education. From that, how can we ensure that organizations such as the education system, but also community organizations, and how they can really stand up and stand up for children and give a child a voice when places like the police and these privatized institutions just don't do that. They totally ignore children's voices, and this is the system that we end up in. I will go to you, Eva, because I know that your report touched on schooling a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think, so Smart Justice for Young People's action plan to end the overrepresentation of particular groups of children and young people in the criminal legal system. We have a sort of a whole section on education, and we have really noticed how significant a role education plays in terms of the criminalisation of children and young people. I think there's kind of two domains, right? There's police in schools doing sort of more coffee with a cop, like essentially sort of sometimes even delivering community legal education we're seeing a bit of as well, like police coming to deliver a cybersecurity talk, that kind of thing, things that really aren't their job, basically. Like crime prevention and early intervention is not the job of police. I think that that's a story that we're trying to tell very clearly. And then we have police being used to respond to behaviour, essentially, and to respond to conflict within schools. And I think I really see both of those things as different sides of the same problem, right? It's this real lack of boundaries when it comes to processes which criminalise kids in spaces that they should be safe and free to learn and make friends and make mistakes and do all the normal things that kids are meant to do. So I think that we've been trying to, I can see somebody's put a question in the chat there as well around sort of having those conversations. We've met with the Department of Education here in Victoria, and we're also sort of starting to do some work speaking to schools, particularly through Target Zero, which is sort of slightly related to Smart Justice for Young People. It's a pilot program out in the western suburbs, looking to end, again, the overrepresentation of those particular groups of children and young people. We're really trying to have these conversations around how we can reduce suspensions, reduce expulsions, because, at the moment, I think the parole board in Victoria stopped collecting data around how many kids in custody were suspended or expelled in 2019. It was sitting around 67%, but I was having a conversation with a teacher at Cherry Creek, which is one of 2 youth prisons in Victoria, and he was saying that the figures are well and truly over 90% of those kids had been suspended or expelled. And a lot of the time they're soft expelled, so they're just sort of asked not to come back, which means that they're not even set up with a new school to attend. And they're basically given no support around that transition, and that's just absolutely shameful. And absolutely directly leads to those young people ending up in jail.
No, it is very, very shameful. I'm going to turn to Josh, because I know, Josh, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, working with children, working with young people now. But I'd also love to hear you talk a bit more about the education system in the Alice Springs Youth Detention. I know that reading an article from you talking about how it was actually really helpful in how the education side of it really transitioned into the therapeutic side as well.
So I was on the mental health team at the detention centre, and so worked really closely with the Owen Springs School, and the Owen Springs School would let me sit in school classes with the young people and help with their schoolwork, and help regulate people when they were having a hard time. I was free to, if someone was struggling a bit with the day, a bit overwhelmed, or something was happening for that person, take that person into a breakout room and have a yarn with them, or take them to my therapy room and, work with that young person until they were able to rejoin the class. That school, was incredible. They had some of the best teachers I've ever met, people that knew how to work with young traumatized people, at the very last resort of their conditions of what they were going through, what they were living in detention. Those teachers were so patient and knew how to talk to those young people, where these young people could possibly go to that school and just sit in that class and do it because they had to, right? They're in detention. They don't have much choice, or they didn't even have to go to class if they didn't want to. They could have sat in their cell block if they wanted to. And most of those young people were going to that school because they were learning something. They were learning about, they were learning a culturally safe way of education. The the teachers were catering education for young traumatized Indigenous children. When I was at the detention centre, 100% of the young people that were incarcerated there were Indigenous. And so, you know, when that school was taken away and those young people were moved to Darwin, it's like this incredible structure that these young people had with people that knew them and was just stripped away from them and taken away. Yeah, I don't really know what to say. It was very, very hard to live through that, and I can't imagine what it was like for those young people that had to live through that. I've never ever seen a young person attack a student, a teacher. You know, they might have blues with the officers, but I've never seen, not once, a student or a young person attack it. It just speaks for itself, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. We've been seeing all of these alternative responder models. Bring it back to kind of the topic. We've seen a lot of these alternative responder models where it's really the nitty gritty of it is being there for the child and making sure children and the youth know that someone has their back and someone's there to, help them through whatever they're going through. And so situations like in Western Australia, they have what's called the night place where youth can go there for a multitude of reasons of a night time. Do you guys have any examples of alternative, I guess, models? It's very elusive what that is, but that you have seen are really working where in typical situations police may have arrived and it could have been detrimental, but there's been these other either community organizations or something that's really changed the trajectory of what's going on.
I mean, I can speak to, like I mentioned earlier, we in the Territory, unfortunately, just have to undo some of the things that have happened and been put into place for our young people. It's about making the powers that be accountable for what they've done, and undoing some of these systems that they've put in place, because we've had our funding cut to our diversion programs. You know, we don't have any youth programs in Alice Springs. You know, the diversion programs work. Like, the evidence speaks for itself, and so unfortunately, I don't have a good news story about that. And what does, like, we know it works, but it's pretty, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I agree. Diversion is a great one. It's a great alternative, but unfortunately, a lot of the time, police use discretionary powers to be away with it, and so we're not actually seeing how successful it can be.
Yeah, I mean, I had a young person when I lost my job when the young people got moved from Alice Springs detention to the Holtz Correctional Facility in Darwin, thousands of kilometres away from their family, community, and whatnot. And I lost my job, and so I lost access to those young people. I was a mentor in that detention centre. I understand I was a visitor to Central Australia, and so I was conflicted of being a mentor in the Alice Springs Detention Centre, thinking I was taking someone else's job, you know, someone that could do that job better than me. But I realised that I was a mentor and I was helping these young people navigate the system. And so there was, like, when I work at Headspace now, and I found a way to get access to people that were coming out. And there was a young person who I knew from detention, and I caught up with him when he left detention, and brought him into Headspace, and, you know, referred him to Headspace, referred him to me, and he hadn't gone to school for 2.5 years. And so that week I got him enrolled at school. And this was 6 months ago, and he's still going to school, you know. And that was just from me trying to figure out, if I wasn't trying to figure out and find that pathway to the young people that were coming out of detention, they just end up back in the community, to reoffend. And so this young person is like, through Headspace and the mental health stream, found a pathway back to education and hasn't reoffended and, is out of detention and is going to school and getting an education.
That's such a great story. And by the sounds of it, Headspace is such a great alternative, giving that really holistic view of helping kids really heal from trauma and have a great mentor like yourself. Eva, have you got any experiences that you've had of really good programs or anything in Victoria, just to give a kind of example to the audience here of what an alternative might look like for a youth response?
Yeah, look, I think any kind of system response that's engaging with young people has the opportunity to work in an anti-carceral and like non-punitive way with those children and young people. Like a really good example I can think of here is I worked on an evaluation for a program that's being run out of a youth homelessness service here in Victoria. And it's a specific family violence casework program for children and young people. And the dedication of the practitioners in that program to kind of working really differently with children and young people to how a typical family violence program would. So that includes providing really holistic support around young people who'd been misidentified as the respondents in family violence intervention orders, providing, opportunities for therapeutic support and healing, driving those young people to appointments that they wouldn't have been able to get to otherwise, liaising with those young people's schools in instances where young people might have been behaving in ways that the school was like cracking down on, or sort of responding to in a punitive way, like just really doing that constant advocacy. And like Josh was saying, like really building really strong, trusting relationships with those young people in the program, because children and young people, particularly those who've been involved in the child protection system or who've been criminalised, have every reason not to trust adults in clinical settings, like absolutely every reason. So building trust can take a while. And I think that, even though that wasn't necessarily the focus of that program, I think it was a really good example of how, any interaction with children and young people can be an opportunity to sort of provide like a really strong, healing-oriented, anti-punitive, anti-carceral response.
Great, thank you. And I agree, it's really on us to help children in any sense that we can. And we've got a question talking about how do we disrupt the prevailing societal narrative about the supposed need for the tough on crime rhetoric. And what do we do, not to just reinforce this within the echo chambers that we live in, but break past that and to get to mainstream society, not just the echo chambers. I'll go with you, Eva, you're on my screen.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of main thing that we've been focused on at Smart Justice for Young People over the last year or so, because we were basically finding that trying to advocate for any sort of legislative reform, policy reform, was becoming impossible, because you open the paper every day and youth crime, suburban siege, whatever, is front page. And I think that in terms of trying to get this out of our own echo chambers, we're kind of working on a diverse range of different strategies at the moment. We're building a shared message guide for members of the coalition. So the idea is that that will sort of have talking points that people are able to access to start sort of telling different stories about children and young people, including in, you know, something. And I think that these narratives have gotten worse because of technology as well. Like something that we're seeing all the time is like community Facebook groups or community WhatsApp groups that are essentially becoming all about surveilling and criminalising young people. Like, you know, photos of a young person on a Ring camera accusing them of committing some kind of crime, often completely baselessly, and often there's really significant racism involved in those accusations as well. Kind of looking at within those sort of smaller forums, day-to-day conversations we're having within our communities, how we actually start to combat some of those narratives, because, you know, like Josh has highlighted and like I was saying before, those narratives are reaching young people, and they're really significantly impacting young people's mental health, and it's absolutely shameful. And all of that's for a couple of clicks and trying to sell a few more newspapers. It's really outrageous.
Yeah, definitely. Josh, have you got anything to add in relation to the getting, you know, breaking through that rhetoric of tough crime and the need for tough crime and keep getting it past our echo chambers?
Yeah, I mean, like what Eva said, it is this narrative that needs to be changed. You know, the young people are hearing this stuff and they are saying this stuff, and it's really detrimental to them individually, but then follow-on effect to our whole community. And if people don't understand that, they need to start to understand that. You know, we have this narrative of the Northern Territory and the crime wave that we're experiencing at the moment. But I mean, I guess I feel like from my personal experience, it all started when, you know, Kumanjay died at the hands of police. And then Action for Alice, this page that just highlights day after day, all day long, you know, racism, and points out, you know, it's like what Ava said about, you know, the Ring camera and the young people, and it's just like inherently racist surveillance on young people. Sorry, I'm a bit foggy at the moment. I've got COVID, so I'm losing my train of thought.
No, that was great.
Yeah, and so it's about changing the narrative. I mean, when you look at the statistics around crime, the crime hasn't really changed over the years. It goes up and down like it always does. But we have this narrative of, you know, crime and what's happening in our town and in the Northern Territory. But I mean, you have young people dying at the hands of police, and you have all this inherent racism online that's being fed out to the wider community. You're going to have a reaction from young people. You know, like how is a young person supposed to trust the law or trust their community when they can die at the hands of the law, or they get treated like they do from the community? You know, it just creates this cycle of racism and crime, and, you know, this narrative that doesn't change. So I guess the activists and the people that are being really loud and really annoying about it just need to continue being loud and annoying, and we need to start, you know, using the people in the right places and telling the people in the right places who can make change, or who can, you know, make a really loud, annoying noise that people are going to listen to. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think speaking up is definitely, and having that really forefront advocacy is so important. And we have some questions along the lines of youth voices in that really frontal, you know, how are youth voices at the front line really making a change, and what are the impacts that we are seeing today of not having youth voice included? Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. There was something else I wanted to touch on, but I've lost it. It's in the COVID abyss now. I've completely lost it.
That's okay. Eva, have you got anything on?
Yeah, on the harms of not including young people's voices, absolutely. I think there's a pretty strong ethical imperative to include young people in conversations about them. But aside from that, we just get worse outcomes if we don't speak to children and young people about what they want and genuinely listen because, yeah, at the moment, I think particularly across the board, but particularly for young people who are criminalised, they're told what to do and there's no flexibility and no kind of genuine listening and agency in how the system's responding to those children and young people, which leads to terrible outcomes across the board. Yeah, I'm lucky enough to get to work with some really amazing young lived and living experience advisors in my work, and just think, every report I've ever written that involves those young people, or every time young people are involved in producing any kind of project, any program, any piece of work, it is infinitely better than it would be otherwise. I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, definitely. We have another question along the same lines of youth voices, but in particular to police oversight bodies, and how are we going to elevate youth voices in those institutional, really policy and lawmaking settings, and how do we, in the same institutions, how do we reduce the barriers of reporting? Because we do see a lot of marginalised First Nations, culturally and linguistically diverse communities just not reporting being victims of crime as well. So yeah, what advice would you have around oversight bodies and making sure youth voices are at the paramount inside institutions?
I guess breaking the stigma around youth, and we still have youth their brains are still developing, but they're very, very intelligent. I mean, the youth I work with know 2, 3 different languages. That's thousands of more words than most other people do. And I guess every young person I've ever spoken to in juvenile detention is the last place they wanted to be. They know what they wanted to do. I've done narrative stories with them about where they would want to be. I guess this is me answering that last question because I lost it before, but those young people would tell me, where they would want to be and what they would rather be doing, kind of thing. And it's they don't understand the underlying issues as to why they ended up in that place, but they understood what they like and where they'd want to be. I'll let Eva answer this question.
No, I think that's so true. Young people know what they want and what's good for them as individuals, and any kind of support provided to children and young people that doesn't centre what they want for their own life, I think is just going to recreate and reproduce the same problems that we've already seen. So I think that's very true. In terms of the specific question around police oversight, it's a really hard one. I don't know whether it's sort of different in other states, but a lot of the time, also speaking to coalition members of ours who work at the Police Accountability Project at Melbourne Community Legal, a lot of the time, and I used to work in a community legal centre where young people would call with police complaints, and honestly the system is so deficient that a lot of the time, without wanting to dissuade young people from making complaints, you have to be really honest with those young people about the fact that, look, I think it's over 99% of police complaints are handled internally. and the kind of the potential, the risk for re-traumatization is extremely high. So I think that that's, even though there's been those changes to IBAC recently, I think that that's sort of still something that we're still seeing when speaking to colleagues at Police Accountability Project. So yeah, I think that that's a really hard one, and that's an area where we need to do so much work. I think it's sort of also just linking back to something Samara was saying in the last session. Police are a trigger point for children and young people from criminalised communities, you know, particularly Aboriginal children and young people, and, you know, in Victoria, children and young people living in residential care, children and young people in public housing, and multicultural children and young people. It's like the levels of kind of community fear and the potential for re-traumatisation through any kind of engagement with police and police processes is so high that it's really, I think, any kind of significant change to how young people are able to participate in complaints processes would really have to involve some pretty strong relational work in terms of building trust with those young people, because it's not there, and it's our fault. I speak as a, you know, settler working in the community legal system, broader services system. Yeah, it's our job to rebuild that trust.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 33 and you know, participating member of society, and I'm still scared of police based off my past. And so it kind of can't imagine what young people and trying to navigate that system feels like.
Yeah, I really echo that, Josh. It's being an adult, you can't imagine how scared children feel when you come into contact with police. As a First Nations person myself, it's very, I couldn't imagine, and I'm very, very, yeah, it just breaks my heart. Wrapping it up, just to finish it up here, I want to ask you both, what is one bold policy we should fight for in this section, in this for youth justice and speaking up for youth? What is one big policy change we should make, and putting that to Parliament? Say a parliamentarian was here, what are we saying?
Like raising the age of criminal responsibility. I mean, you can't punish trauma out of kids. You just traumatize them more. You just you make the problem worse. You make people's lives worse. Not just the person, the young person, but the whole community. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, going into intergenerational trauma. Really, sorry, I will pivot off that. Josh, can I ask you another question? We have someone's talked about how can, what are the strategies and approaches we can take to break intergenerational trauma?
I mean, intergenerational trauma is a big one. We're talking about, you know, our grandmothers and mothers of the stolen generation, and, you know, our ancestors of the many, many massacres that happened in Australia, and, you know, our babies of the intervention. We're talking about like a very, very long history of trauma, but we also have that that strong history of strength and our culture that carries with us. We lived in those two worlds, you know. Every person carries with them, you know, the trauma of all those things that I've mentioned, but they also have the strength of their people and, you know, their ancestors and, you know, their jukupa, their dreaming, their country, the land, it heals, you know. I guess calling out the racism and addressing the racism, and it's everybody's responsibility to, you know, call out that racism when you see it and be strong, because yeah, you don't to stop causing that intergenerational trauma. We need to address where that trauma is coming from, and it's blatant racism. It's the killing of Aboriginal people. It's, you know, the oppression of Aboriginal people. And once we start even accepting that as a thing, we can't really address that intergenerational trauma. We survive it and we live it.
Okay. Thanks, Josh. I'll throw to you, Eva, for the bold policy, but if you'd like to add anything on intergenerational trauma that you've seen from research and your work, please feel free.
Yeah, no, I think Josh spoke to that really beautifully. Yeah, I think something, you know, in the sort of research work I've done that shows up a lot as well for young people is the kind of intergenerational trauma of incarceration. You know, it's not uncommon for young people who are incarcerated in Victoria to have had incarcerated parents, incarcerated family members. So yeah, that definitely plays out in all different ways. But I think Josh articulated that much better than I could. I think in terms of one bold policy change, I think police in schools is a really huge one for us. You know, really trying to keep schools as a place where young people can feel safe and can learn and can, you know, like Josh was saying before, you know, developmentally, it's really normal for young people to make mistakes or to, you know, have conflict, and young people need to be able to do that in a way where they're not perceived as criminals, basically, where they have, you know, every child and every young person should have the same opportunity to go to school and learn and make mistakes and fight with other kids without fearing the cops being called on them. So I think that that's a really important starting point for us.
Yeah, great. They're both obviously so important. Do either of you have any last thoughts, anything that you want to throw out before we move to the main session?
I guess young traumatized children aren't criminals, and so, you know, alternatives to that, it's finding what these young people are good at, like focusing on that. Stop putting these young people down and dragging them down and killing them for a start.
Great, thanks, Josh. Eva?
I can't really think of a better note to end on than that. Just wanted to thank you and thank Josh. It's a real privilege to get to be on this panel.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both. It was lovely to hear from you and your experiences and your knowledge. And it wasn't lovely. It was important to hear about what's happening to our youth, but it's something that we all need to listen to, understand, and know so we can actually do something about it. So, yeah, thank you guys.